This video is about value, and value is a really important element of art that will play a role in helping us make the most of our printmaking project. So we're just making a quick stop into the world of value to get comfortable with this concept. And what is value? Value essentially refers to the relative lightness and darkness of a surface, right? If something is light, then it has a light value. If something is dark, then it has a dark value. That is the local value. If you have a dark sweater on, that's the local value. The sweater is dark. Value also refers to the lightness and darkness that is created by light and shadow, right? So you could have a dark plate that has a light shining across it, and then the value shifts across that surface, right? So value is sort of both of these things: the actual color that something is, if it's a light or dark color, and the way that light or shadow runs across that surface. A nice quick example of this is, let's take, for example, a red apple. On the left side, we have that apple in full color and the sort of variety of light changes that happen across its surface. And on the right side, we have the grayscale or black and white version of that apple, right? The local value of this red apple is relatively dark. Again, we can see that because when we translate it to a grayscale image and we squint our eyes, we see that's kind of a dark circle, right? A dark form. You can also see the various value shifts that happen across the surface of the apple with the way the light is hitting it, right? So both of these concepts refer to value. A little bit of light value here, darker value over here, right? Dark value down here. You can sort of see the way that shifts across the apple in full color too. Value is so important because it helps to create the illusion of shape without line, which creates the illusion of form, which helps kind of give a piece a sense of depth, sometimes of realism. Another word for value is tone, which really refers to those various degrees of gray. And we see such a nice example of that in this drawing of an ice skate sort of hanging against a wall with these beautiful cast shadows coming up behind it. The drawing has such an incredible sense of depth to it because of the artist's use of value change. Again, a kind of more literal way of showing that. Both of these are technically renderings of apples, but the rendering on the left is a pretty flat graphic rendering with a line depicting the apple, and on the right we see these beautiful soft value shifts that are almost photorealistic, and that is giving us a sense of a much rounder form. The way that we tend to talk about the organization of value is through the use of a value scale, and a value scale is simply the spectrum of value that you can get between black and between white. A value scale can be more than 9 little slots. It can be something like up to, I think it's something like 30 or 40. The human eye can perceive that much variation in value, but usually, let's say a 7 to 9 scale value scale gives you enough of a range to give you a sense of value shifts. Now, low value is dark value. We also might call this low key. This usually refers to things that are actually just dark in color and things like shadows. And high value on the right side, we might refer to as high key, and this would be used for higher value objects or highlights on objects, and then everything in between could be these middle value, middle key, mid-tones, right? So we've got black on one side, white on the other, and these sort of shifts in tone across the middle of the value scale. Now, one of the concepts that I repeatedly find sort of mind-blowing, despite teaching this concept over the course of many years and learning this as a student myself, is that color and value are intrinsically related. They have a direct relationship, right? When a color is light or a color is dark, that means that they're corresponding value is light or their corresponding value is dark. And we can see that here when we look at this color wheel. We see this kind of grayscale version of it, right? The yellow is really popping out as the lighter value. That violet on the lower left looks really dark, right? So when we are looking at the world around us, or we are looking at images, we are seeing value shifts even if we are seeing something in color. And we see that beautifully illustrated here again through a painting you probably are familiar with, the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. The one on the left is the painting with its sort of full color palette, and on the right, the grayscale version. When we turn an image to grayscale, it doesn't simply disappear into one single gray. Each of those colors have corresponding values. One of the ways that we teach value shifts, especially when we're learning how to draw, is through this concept of light logic, right? There is this way, this equation that light will always work when it hits a surface. It is predictable. And that is simply that if light is coming from, in this case, the upper left, from somewhere up here, as that light shines onto a form like a sphere, you will have a point on the form that is the brightest, and we call that the highlight. Around that highlight, you will see some more diffuse light, right? Beyond that, as the form curves and goes more towards the darkness and away from the light, you have what you might commonly call just shadow, right? And then we have this thing that's very interesting. We have what's called the core of the shadow. And the core of the shadow is the darkest bit of shadow on a form. And the darkest bit of shadow is not actually where we might assume it would be, again, towards the bottom of the sphere, the part that's closest to the ground or the surface that it's on. It's actually a bit higher, and that is because of this thing called reflected light. And reflected light comes from this surface, from the ground or the tabletop. No matter what this surface is, it's receiving some of that light that's coming from up here and therefore bouncing some back to the bottom part of the sphere, making that little bit that touches the ground slightly lighter, and therefore creating this concept of the core of the shadow. You could try setting up something in your home, try putting a bright light on it, turning the lights off, and see if you see something like this. You might be really excited to see that it really does happen. And then lastly, there is this cast shadow, right, which we're pretty familiar with. Just walking down the street, the sun is shining, we see our cast shadow, same concept here. So this is something that a lot of artists try to memorize and really put into practice and really notice, because it is something that will happen always, right? It's just the way that light works when it is shining on a surface. And you will see lots of examples of this in the world around you. Again, if you're in a drawing class, you'll try to put this into practice. This is a drawing from a drawing class, another exercise that's sort of, I don't want to say fun to do, but kind of standard, is this drawing of a crumpled up piece of paper and noticing the value shifts that you can get there. A lot of artists make work that depends on value. This is a painting by the artist Via Selmans, and these are really interesting paintings. They are paintings of kind of the stars in the sky, sort of the extended solar system around us. But what she does is she works on these paintings over the course of something like a year, slowly adding layer after layer of paint to get this sense of depth in the piece. Another really interesting example of an artist who's depended on value in different ways are these pieces by the artist Ed Ruscha. And I love these drawings that kind of look like they're pieces of paper spelling out words in space. Again, simple value shifts creating that illusion. Some really interesting places that you start to see value relate to line, which is where we're kind of going with value since we're moving on to a printmaking project, is when you see artists utilizing hatching and cross-hatching and stippling. And hatching and cross-hatching are simply techniques where you draw lines close together or far apart, crisscrossing over each other, dense in some areas, less dense in other areas, in order to create that illusion of value shift, right? So if you start to look closely at this very strange image, this print, you'll notice that there are areas that, of course, look lighter and areas that look darker. What's incredible about this print is that all of this is being done simply through the accumulation of more line in certain places and less line in others. And this is an idea that we're going to play around with because we will be making prints as well. And as we get into the printmaking process, you'll see why this concept is so important. A close-up, not from that actual print, but from another print of that cross-hatching at play is right here, right? And you can see that this is not, say, an accumulation of pencil marks on top of each other to create that illusion of value. This is different lines crisscrossing over each other. And if you try squinting your eyes right now, you'll notice that they sort of blur together, creating again that illusion of value. An example from a drawing project, just hatching, cross-hatching. Cross-hatching is when they cross over each other. A really simple, beautiful example of how you can get value shifts in a still life. Beautiful example of a cross-hatch drawn ear, right? We're getting different value shifts as those lines cross over each other. A concept related to this is stippling, or really just accumulating dots in different amounts. Again, same concept. You get darker spots with more dots, lighter spots with less dots, and you can create quite elaborate drawings. Because we will be making prints from linoleum blocks, which I will explain shortly the whole process, we rely on these concepts of hatching and cross-hatching to create the illusion of value shifts. And here we can see a nice example of that. This is actually a print. A print is made, in our particular case, by carving into a soft surface and then rolling ink across it and pressing that plate onto a piece of paper so that you can get the print. So to get these various shifts in value, this looks really light, this looks a little bit darker, this looks darker, right, is by changing the accumulation of lines, right? So this is, again, why we are starting with the concept of value to kind of ease us into printmaking. I want us to think as much as possible about how we can play with texture, with value shifts, and make our prints as interesting as possible. This is actually just a sample of different marks you can make on a linoleum block. Again, this will make more sense as we go into the world of printmaking. Here we see, again, using lines to create a variety of textures and values. So our assignment will be very simple. This is a really quick assignment, but again, it's important to do as well as you can because it will help you make your printmaking assignment even stronger. It is to make 3 value scales. There is a template for the value scales. If you don't have a printer, you can always draw your own. If you have a printer, you're free to use that and save yourself a little bit of time. Your value scales should reflect these 3 different processes. One is hatching. Hatching is simply drawing lines next to each other in different proximities to create that value shift. Cross-hatching is crisscrossing those lines, and stippling is dotting or dashing those lines, right? And if you squint your eyes and you look at these value scales right now, you'll notice that they have a fairly smooth transition, right? So you want your values on the left side to be as close to very dark as possible, and you want your values on the right side to be as close as very light as possible. As you move through the squares, kind of accumulating or decumulating from the left to the right, you want those transitions to be totally smooth. You also don't want any box to kind of jump out and look like it's out of order. So this is a deceptively more complicated assignment or exercise than it appears to be. So take your time doing this. I recommend doing it with pencil perhaps to start, and if you want to, you can fill it back in with marker just to finesse it. Again, the more time you spend kind of wrapping your head around this, the more I think it'll be helpful for your printmaking project. Again, just that straight value scale for your example. little example of what, again, that hatching can do when it's rendering an actual image. And then as we move into printmaking, you may find that sort of thinking through mark making this way will be helpful for you.